our speaker. Today with us is Dr. Phil Harmon. He's a professor of plant pathology and an extension specialist. He received his undergraduate and doctoral degrees from Purdue University. His research interests include diseases of warm season turfgrass species and disease management of southern highbush blueberry. In addition to providing efficient and effective disease management strategies for clientele, additional research goals include selection for turfgrass and blueberry disease resistance in collaboration with plant breeding programs. His extension efforts have focused on providing rapid and accurate diagnostic services to the turfgrass, small fruits, and ornamental plant industries. Recommendations given as part of diagnostic services include practical research-based disease management solutions. He has served as an assigning editor for the plant disease management reports and as an associate editor of applied turfgrass science. I was talking with Phil earlier today, trying to find out, how long he'd been with the university, because I know he's been around for a while. And he was telling me that he's coming up on 20 years being with the University of Florida. And so I knew he'd been around for a while. It's us old timers that, time just gets by in a hurry. So, I'm so excited that Phil is here. Today, Dr. Harmon is providing a presentation on mosaic disease of St. Augustine, certainly an important topic. So it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to Dr. Phil Harmon.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate that introduction, Tom. It's good to see you again, and always been a pleasure working with you and FFL. And today, what a mess. What is making this mess? It's quite a mess. It's a viral disease. In the 20 years that I've been doing turfgrass pathology in the state of Florida, this is the first viral disease of turf that we've really had any substantial consequence from. And so there are some things to learn and to know about differences between viral diseases. Some of those we can pull from ornamental plants where viruses are more common. Others are unique to the turfgrass system. So today we're going to talk about mosaic disease, the virus that causes it, and a new development, fairly new development within the last 10 years that has caused a lot of turf loss and headaches for communities in South Florida. Presentations co-authored by my colleague, retired Dr. Jane Polston, and I would like to mention this is our 100th anniversary of the turfgrass program at the University of Florida last year. And so we've been around, we've been doing a lot of work to make turf better. And we're going to continue that today, hopefully with some good information about mosaic disease and what we can do to recognize it and do about it. All right, Tom, are you able to see my slide there?
Yeah, it's come up and looking good.
All right, wonderful. Okay, so today the overview, we want to go through what mosaic disease of St. Augustinegrass is in Florida. It's not a new thing. It's been around since the 1950s, in fact, and probably before that. We'll talk very briefly about the history of that disease and why it really hasn't come on the radar as far as homeowners are concerned, or turf pathologists much for that matter. We'll talk about lethal viral necrosis, or LVN. This is a complication of the mosaic disease. It's a further development of this disease. Lethal viral necrosis kills turfgrass and is causing the replacement of Floratam lawns in South Florida. So we'll talk about what that looks like, the research that we've done to date to know what it is, what causes it, and most importantly, what we can do about it to minimize our losses and deal with this disease when it comes into communities, into our home lawns. So we'll talk about what those management steps are to first try to prevent it from occurring. We have not been particularly successful at stopping it. We've slowed it in some cases. We'll talk about how we can do that using good management practices for viral diseases of plants. We'll talk quite a bit about LVN resistant turfgrass varieties. When lawns die from mosaic disease, when they develop the lethal viral necrosis, the severe symptom, and die, those Floratam lawns need to be replaced. In many cases, they should not be replaced with Floratam. That'll be a message you hear throughout the presentation. So how can we pick a better grass or grass alternative to put into these lawns that have died? And then when and where to install. We'll talk through some of the frequently asked questions about how's the virus moving in, where is it in the soil and the landscape, and what can we do about it moving forward to get rid of it or to minimize its impact as we maintain our Florida lawns. So viruses, we're all sick to death of hearing about viruses, I know, but it's important for plant pathologists to get across that viruses also affect plants. They can infect, of course, people, animals, but plants too. And like in animals, plant viruses can cause a wide range of symptoms depending on the individual that's been infected by the virus. And those symptoms can change through time as a virus occurs and exists in nature. It can be mild, it can be severe, and it can spread locally or very broadly. And those sorts of factors in the epidemiology of viral diseases change through time and space. And we've seen a change in mosaic disease and lethal viral necrosis that we're going to talk about today. They're difficult to control because viruses don't respond to some of the typical tools that we have that include fungicides. They don't respond particularly well to agronomic inputs like some of our fungal diseases either. So affecting the disease with nitrogen inputs or water frequency doesn't really work. We can't control that disease, the viral disease, like we can influence some of our fungal diseases. So we'll talk about those differences between the usual diseases and this new viral disease that's causing so many problems in the communities where it's been introduced. As I mentioned, the virus is Sugarcane Mosaic Virus. It's abbreviated SCMV. As the name implies, it was first described in sugarcane plants in Belglade in Florida. And it causes a range of symptoms in that plant as well that range from a very mild mosaic symptom or broken yellow streaky lines along the grass plant's leaf blade, in this case sugarcane, through to more severe loss of sugarcane production. And the way that the sugarcane mosaic virus is dealt with in sugarcane production is through host plant resistance. Genetics of the crop that's being grown are altered whenever an outbreak occurs to more resistant varieties. We're seeing a similar thing happen with turfgrass in the state of Florida and Floratam, which, as we'll mention and talk about, is very common. It's very good grass, and this is a problem for it where this virus occurs. So, this was known back in the 1960s. 2013 was the first time that we saw a really severe reaction in a Floratam lawn. It probably happened a few years before that on small scale. We found in Pinellas County and also in Palm Beach County. It spread fairly thoroughly through Pinellas County, but has been slow to jump to other surrounding counties like Hillsborough or North or South. In Palm Beach County, it spread more rapidly over the last 10 years. It spread north up through Vero Beach, where there are very few reported cases, down through the Florida Keys, and now around the tip of Florida and up through the Fort Myers area, some of the newer areas to be confirmed positive to have the virus. Not in every community in these counties, certainly, or these sections of Florida, but in scattered communities throughout that typically tend to be communities with high-end well-maintained lawns of Floratam St. Augustine grass. So this lethal viral necrosis constitutes a new disease, a new problem, because there are new symptoms beyond what was reported and what's known to occur with mosaic. The historical disease mosaic that occurred back in the 60s also occurred in St. Augustine grass, in pasture areas and in roadsides, but it didn't kill the grass. It didn't cause loss of turf quality or vigor in the lawns that it infected. And so it was largely ignored and not particularly prominent. So it was difficult to find, even for plant pathologists that were studying it at the time through the 60s and 1970s. The new symptoms in 2013 are important, and we'll show a lot of pictures of what those look like because they kill the grass, they cause an economic impact. And so we've referred to this problem that's associated with sugarcane mosaic virus and is a continuation of mosaic disease or further development of severe symptoms. We call that lethal viral necrosis. Now, mosaic is how this disease starts in all varieties. The disease causes the symptom mosaic. The disease name is also mosaic. The causal agent, what causes mosaic, is sugarcane mosaic virus. So mosaic and a lot of those different uses can be confusing, but this picture that's on the screen now shows broken yellow lines of discoloration. We call this chlorosis or yellowing, where it should be green. And the broken lines are important because it distinguishes, it's a random pattern, and it distinguishes from other more regular pattern causes of similar symptoms. Some of those might include nitrogen deficiency, where you'd expect grass to yellow out or thin. Sometimes we'll see stripes of yellow, depending on the nutrient deficient symptom and how severe that problem is. In this case, they're broken lines, they're yellowing, and these are difficult to find in a lawn that's affected with mosaic in most cases. We have to crawl around on our hands and knees and look for them. They're not on every leaf blade, and they're a little bit difficult to find. Here's some more severe symptoms of mosaic. There's also fungal disease in this picture on the lower leaf blades here. This is gray leaf spot. But this broken yellow line of mosaic symptom is how the disease mosaic starts in Floratam and also in other varieties of St. Augustine grass that do not develop lethal viral necrosis. So this is the first stage. This is the mosaic disease. This is what's been around for a long time. And lawns that have this can be managed and maintained, and homeowners will be very happy with the quality of the lawn as it's present. Even in the most severe symptoms are yellowing. They don't occur on very many of the shoots within a lawn. And so here's a very severe mosaic symptom on a leaf blade of St. Augustine grass from an inoculation that I did under stress conditions. And that's as severe as mosaic gets or has gotten since the 1960s through 2013. So not a problem that we've been aware of or working on or that we particularly cared about prior to the lawns dying. So for instance, this lawn has mosaic. It has the disease mosaic, sugarcane mosaic virus can be found. This is a palmetto lawn. The homeowners are okay with this having a viral disease. It's there, it's in the environment, it's in this lawn, but it's not causing problems of significance for them in their particular lawn. Contrast that to lethal viral necrosis. Now we have at a certain time of year, a transition from the yellowing symptom that we saw to a brown necrosis or death of the material that previously was yellow. So here with the light shining through this St. Augustine grass leaf blade, this is Floratam St. Augustine grass. We can see those broken yellow lines are starting to turn brown. They're starting to become more severe. They're starting to become more persistent and consistent throughout the canopy and on all parts of the turf plant that are attached to that particular stem. So this browning and then the shriveling up and necrosis or death of the older leaf blades up through the newest leaf blade can spread and transitions in that fall time of year as our cool evening temperatures return to the southern part of the state. So here's a better picture of a transition between the yellowing areas and the brown areas. This can look like fungal disease. It can look like insect pest pressure feeding, but this is caused by a virus. And so fungicides, insecticides are not going to help with this. This is Floratam that's starting the lethal viral necrosis cycle in the beginning of the cool period in the state of Florida in about November in most cases in Palm Beach County and further south. And this will continue to progress. The turf takes on a bronze to brown crispy look. It starts to die, and all of the plants associated and attached again with those stems that are infected can develop that. The spread and the rate of development varies from lawn to lawn, community to community, and an area within the state to area within the state. So this can take months for large sections of lawn to years, up to 3 years. We've seen this to take to go from known to occur to causing turf loss. But the key symptom that we look for is a necrosis where we previously had the mosaic, and that necrosis is lethal because it's systemic and it affects all of the plants attached. Later in the epidemic, we'll see some plants still have mosaic symptoms. Others have transitioned to the lethal viral necrosis symptom, the blighting of the turf. So this grass in the background is dead. This is some turf that escaped, and so it didn't get infected until or show symptoms until later. And so we typically can see up to 97, 98% of the lawn affected by this virus when it occurs and is most severe. And then we see weeds come in the compromised turf grass. Here we have Bermuda grass, common Bermuda grass weeds. We have crabgrass weeds. The bronzed, brown looking wide-bladed turf here is Floratam St. Augustine grass. So this is how severe it can get. It makes the lawn look bad, but it also makes it impossible to control weeds and other problems. So this is a lawn with lethal viral necrosis. In other cases, less of the percentage of the lawn will die. And so here we have lethal viral necrosis around this utility box, have weeds coming in. It didn't all die and get some recovery in the summer, but it looks terrible. We can have fungal disease that can come in and also occur in the same areas. And again, a lot of weed encroachment and difficulty managing this lawn as an acceptable turf area for this particular landscape. Early on in the epidemic in Pinellas County, we saw within communities of primarily almost exclusively Floratam that the Floratam was almost uniformly affected negatively. Very difficult situation. The grass died. When it was replaced, it died a second time, a third time. Exceptions occurred in some lawns where the grass that was identified was found not to be Floratam. So this is what the disease does: lethal viral necrosis on Floratam. Mosaic never progresses on grasses other than Floratam to this lethal stage. So this has Mosaic. The homeowner wanted to know, why can't you make the rest of my lawn look like this? I don't care if it has Mosaic disease, it looks okay compared to the Floratam that's dying. So again, this wasn't every lawn in every community in these counties. This was scattered throughout different communities, and where it did occur, it tended to spread from lawn to lawn and cause, of course, as you would imagine, a lot of headache. Again, resodding lawns with Floratam resulted in the disease coming back much more quickly and causing sod failure the following year or the next 2 years, where this virus was confirmed as the cause of the loss of the lawn in the first place. So one of the early extension messages that we got out was, don't use Floratam to resod these lawns. They can't be protected. The disease occurs more quickly. The virus builds in the landscape. Choose a resistant grass. And we'll talk more about how you do that and when you want to do that and what IFAS recommendations to follow to make that as successful as possible. But as a review, mosaic disease and lethal viral necrosis are two different things. Mosaic starts the process, and it can develop into lethal viral necrosis in the variety Floratam of St. Augustinegrass. And it does this during the early winter period in most of the state. It's limited to South Florida primarily at this time, and where we see lethal viral necrosis occur. Sugarcane Mosaic Virus is present in other parts of the state, but we don't see lethal viral necrosis north of Pinellas County at this point. There have been a few samples further north than that we're continuing to investigate, and we'll get back to that later. The other varieties of St. Augustinegrass, if we look at other varieties of other species of turf like zoysia, seashore paspalum, Bermuda grass, they do not get lethal viral necrosis, and they other varieties of St. Augustinegrass will maintain a mild mosaic symptom when we replace a lawn. The virus will persist, it'll infect the new lawn, but the lawn won't die, and we can manage that lawn with the virus. How long the virus will maintain within these systems, we don't know. They've been there for 10 years in the earliest, and they're still present. Floratam's still not an option for those earliest hit communities that had to replace their Floratam out because the virus is hanging around. So both of these problems, the mosaic, the lethal viral necrosis, are caused by the same virus. The virus name is Sugarcane Mosaic Virus, and again, sporadically distributed throughout South Florida, causing these problems and more on other crop grasses as well. How do you know that it's mosaic and lethal viral necrosis and how these are connected? That's a question that I get, a fair question. I have slides later in the presentation that I don't plan to get to. You can view one of my previous webinars for an in-detailed description of that research and how we know the cause of mosaic, lethal viral necrosis, and the cool temperature triggers for the transition between mosaic and lethal viral necrosis. If you want to look at that webinar, reach out to me with questions, or we can address those in this presentation if we have time as well in the later slides. Okay, so what is the scale of the LVN distribution? In Pinellas County, it's thousands of lawns. It started out with hundreds of lawns that were affected. The lawns died yearly in the September timeframe, and that was the clue into the turf managers in those areas that something different was occurring. The fungicides, insecticides didn't stop that turf, that Floratam turf, from dying in the September timeframe, and it has continued to spread up through Largo and down through the tip of the South St. Pete. The distribution of the virus is pretty heavy within the Pinellas County and is affecting many, many lawns. The outbreak in Palm Beach County in the next year, 2014, spread much more rapidly north and south, as I mentioned, but it didn't hit every community. It hasn't spread as thoroughly necessarily as it did in Pinellas County. So some differences in how the virus has spread and what the patterns are that we've seen have occurred between east and west coasts of Florida. As I mentioned, Glades, Collier, and now Lee County are some of the more recent finds. As it moves further north, we don't know what the disease epidemic is going to look like, if it's going to slow, if it's going to look more like what we saw in Pinellas County. It's something that we're still studying, and just last year we confirmed, and again in Fort Myers. We did have some samples from St. Johns County that we're continuing to work on and try to confirm and get with the turfgrass managers in this high-end community out near Vero Beach to see what the distribution is. So far, we haven't been able to do that. So we're continuing to work there as well. As far as the rate of spread, it can be frustrating because a question that comes up is, now we've found it in our community, of course, what do we do about it? And what's going to happen in the next 2-3 years as we see this disease spread? How severely will it affect the lawns? How quickly? And those are difficult questions to answer for each particular case. So from county to county, I'd say that the spread has been relatively slow. This is not a global pandemic sort of spread. This is a spread that over 10 years has covered South Florida and moved community to community erratically. So we haven't seen, again, every community down the street become infected and have problems. It's been jumping place to place, erratic movement, some nearby communities not developing disease for 2, 3, 4 years after their neighboring communities have had it confirmed. From lawn to lawn, the spread's been more consistent, and the virus spreads by mowers. It spreads out in front of obvious symptoms by at least 2 to 3 lawns, more than you would think, more than you can see the symptoms occurring on. So that's been important for us in the last 10 years when we have new introductions, trying to rip out lawns, kill lawns, eliminate the virus from communities has not been successful because of an insect pest that can spread the virus very randomly and haphazardly, called an aphid, and because, again, this virus can spread with mild symptoms for 2 to 3 lawns further out than we can detect it by visual means. So it's there, and when you see it, it's further spread than you would think in the cases that we've seen, making it very difficult, if not impossible, to completely stop it once it's introduced into a community. Within the lawn, the typical progression includes a first year of detection with an area that doesn't look right, that is bronzing, that's dying. Year 2, that area will die a second time. There may be some recovery that occurs during the summer from areas outside the patch. There'll be weeds come in. But by year 2, those patches become more numerous in the lawn and expand. And then they start to grow together, and eventually the entire lawn, in most cases, is affected. And again, it can be 75%, it can be 97% of the Floratam in the lawn that will succumb each year. Some recovery, weed invasion occurs in the summer. The end effect is that the lawns are not acceptable for homeowners. They don't do their job. They don't look nice for the landscapes that are affected. Where we do see the hardest hit areas are the highest quality monocultures of Floratam in the state, where we have communities that have excellent Floratam lawns. Those are the ones that one notice more quickly and then have abundant, very healthy hosts to become infected. And so gated communities with 1 or 2 vendors that have come in and done the mowing and done the pest control have been those that have been the hardest hit. Other stresses as far as which lawns are going to get the disease and which ones are not, and how severe is the viral disease going to affect the lawn. Other stresses, just like with fungal disease, can impact the severity of this viral disease. So besides the low temperature exposure each year in that November timeframe when this cycle starts, there can be other things that influence severity, like horticultural inputs, mowing height, irrigation frequency and use, etc. If we have a stressed lawn, disease will be more severe. It will occur in a larger incidence, or more of the lawn will be affected as a general rule. And the timing of the symptom progression can be shortened on these stressed lawns as well. Instead of taking 3 years for it to spread, it may only take 1 or 2. So when folks find out that this disease has been detected and confirmed in their particular community, they often ask their county agent or their landscape folks, what's going to happen now that we have the disease? Yogi Berra made several interesting statements. One of those, it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. And what we found is that each of these communities has had a little bit different path from detection through to large areas of Floratam being replaced. Some have taken a lot longer than others. So I'm going to present now some of the observations that we've seen, and throughout this presentation, there have been exceptions, and I'll be happy to address questions at the end about what those were and how they've occurred. But the virus biology is important for us to understand if we are going to understand the management and what we can do to try to impact that, what's going to happen in my community question. Viruses multiply inside their host, and viruses and plants have to do the same. They don't have the right machinery to be able to live on their own. So if their host plant dies, they die. It means that killing your host as a virus is generally a pretty bad idea. Floratam is a grass that dies when it's infected with this particular virus, this strain of Sugarcane Mosaic Virus. The other St. Augustinegrass varieties like CitraBlue, Palmetto, etc., do not. They can maintain viral load, can be present in the lawn, but it has to be inside those host plants. It's spread by moist plant sap, so the virus has to be in plant sap of an infected plant, has to be moved into a new plant and get inside that plant by mechanical means or by insect vector before it dries out. Because if it dries out in that plant sap, it dies. The virus is no longer viable. It can't cause disease, and it's no longer a threat for us from moving lawn to lawn. This virus doesn't affect palms or ornamental plants outside of a few ornamental grasses, and it doesn't affect those particularly severely. It does not affect pets or people or wildlife, which is all a good thing. Only some of the grasses that we grow, and it only kills Floratam and very closely related grasses to Floratam at this point. There are new varieties coming on the market that have been recently reduced, like Cobalt, like CitraBlue, others that we're continuing to evaluate. So far, Floratam has been the one that we want to avoid when this disease comes in and kills our turf. So if moist plant sap moves the virus and can cause infection to spread, mowing is an excellent way to do that. And there's no way to get around mowing as a potential method or mechanism for the virus to spread within a community or a lawn. No matter if it's a company that's mowing your lawn or if it's you mowing your lawn, the virus is going to be cut up, it's going to be ground into new turf, and it's going to infect and be spread. We have not seen plant material being moved on mowers as a mechanism of introduction into new communities. And that's because this virus dies quickly in dried out clippings. It dies when it dries out on our equipment, blades, tires, etc. And so a movement of equipment from one community to the next gives that virus time to dry out and die. And so the patterns in the spread of this disease and the epidemiology that we've seen where the disease comes into communities is not where we'd expect for mowers being a primary source of introducing the virus. Sure, once it's in the community, the mowing will spread the virus. It's the most efficient way to spread the virus. And again, it doesn't matter who's doing the mowing, and a lot of folks want to try to blame the lawn mowing companies for spreading the virus, but it really doesn't matter who mows them or what you do to mow them. You're going to be spreading that short distances regardless. According to our research, there's no way to stop that. We can sanitize our equipment when moving from place to place and from community to community. It's equally effective as just allowing it to dry out. So we can allow the equipment to dry, sanitize, or do a combination of both for an abundance of caution. But as far as management goes, that's where we're at as far as our recommendations. Mowers and other equipment can be sanitized, and it may help reduce the chance of spread, particularly if you're moving short distances, not giving the equipment time to dry out. But it hasn't stopped spread. Where this has been trialed in communities in Palm Beach County, we set up sanitizing stations at the beginning of different pods within communities, sanitized, did some sanitization between lawns. Lawns grow together. The insect pest, the aphid, can spread this virus haphazardly, not very well, but can make these jumps, and even when we do a good job of cleaning and sanitizing our equipment. So it didn't stop spread in the communities that we tried this extensive sanitization processes in, but they can be effective when we don't have time to allow the equipment to dry. So household bleach is very corrosive, but it works very well. And there are several commercial sanitizers that horticultural professionals know about that can help with other viral and other disease-causing organisms. Those work for this disease as well. Furcon-S, Green Shield, Pine Sol, and various alcohols and others here are good examples of what we can use. We have to be careful about wastewater generation, whether or not those products have to be rinsed and where we're going to rinse those. And so those all come into play when developing a plan. In general, the best plan is to limit the movement of equipment from community to community in short distances and without allowing for a time period of that equipment to dry down. Other questions that I get asked a lot, because there are observational things that occur and it causes folks to ask questions about causation versus correlation. And so is it spread in irrigation water? No, the virus has to be in live plant tissue. It can't survive in soil naked either. It has to be in plant tissue. Soil can contain propagules of weeds that can be infected, of St. Augustine grass. So it can reside in the plants, in the soil and other plant parts, but not in the soil alone. It's not spread through the air on its own without an aphid pest. And again, there you see that aphid insect are not regular feeders on St. Augustine grass. They're not particularly problematic or in high numbers. And so when they do feed on St. Augustine grass, it's not particularly for a long period of time, as I understand in talking with my entomology colleagues. And the unfortunate thing is that they persistently carry this virus, and it's been shown in sugarcane and corn and other grass crops to be capable of moving that. And so when we see this virus drop into the middle of a neighborhood near a pond somewhere in the backyard, the most logical way is that an insect or other pest has dropped this in to that community, and that's where the origination of the outbreak starts for many, if not all, of the communities that we've looked at. If this was being moved into communities on mowers, what we did in those cases to test that was to look at where the mowers were unloaded for each pod, what the progression of the mowers were generally on a routine basis in these communities, and look for the disease to have started and spread there first. And they did. They started in areas that suggest an insect pest for introduction, mowers for continued spread locally, plant to plant, lawn to lawn. Are there lookalikes? When we look at lawns, some of these symptoms globally can look like fungal disease, like take-all root rot that can kill lawns, like Pythium root rot, like a gray leaf spot, for instance, that causes lesions. The only ones that have been really troublesome, I'd say, and really do look similar to LVN are a fairly minor disease, leaf rust. Leaf rust is not a big problem on Floratam. It can affect CitraBlue and other St. Augustine varieties, and it produces these pustule-like blisters and browning of leaves here on the right side of the screen that look somewhat similar to LVN. But these are generally not severe, and so where we see this occurring and causing problems is where we've had an introduction into community, and then homeowners or the professionals managing those lawns will look very closely at different lawns to try to detect this problem in other areas, and they'll come up with leaf rust as a potential sample. And so we've gotten a few samples like that. Here's a leaf rust sample on the left, looks very similar. This tested negative for the virus, Sugarcane Mosaic Virus. This is an LVN symptom, looks very similar to the naked eye, again, from a couple of feet away. So if we want to determine, is it LVN or is it rust, we can take a closer look. Here's the rust leaf blade, here's the LVN leaf blade. And if we have a good magnifying glass or a hand lens, we'll see that rust actually produces blister-like pustules. These are little pimple-like structures that have erupted out of the surface of this turf plant and produce orange to black spores. Over on the LVN side, the lesions are pretty similar looking. However, they're not rampant. They're not breaking out of the surface. They're just little brown spots on that leaf blade. So a good magnifying glass in the case of rust versus LVN can tell us which is present. It is also possible for both to be present in the same lawn. We have a dissecting microscope. We can see the tiny black and orange spores being produced out of those blisters confirming that this is leaf rust disease on this particular sample. How do we know if we have sugarcane mosaic virus? So to diagnose a disease, you have to detect or observe a pathogen, and then you also have to associate that with symptoms that are known to occur on that pathogen. What we do at the diagnostic clinic in Gainesville are one of those two things: diagnose or detect, depending on the selected service and what the client wants when they send us their turf. A detection means that we grind up your turf where it looks like it might have the virus, and we do an ELISA. This is an enzyme immunosorbent assay that is a test that detects only the sugarcane mosaic virus in the turf and gives us a color change here. This does not tell us whether this turf had mosaic or lethal viral necrosis, only that this turf was positive for the virus sugarcane mosaic virus. Diagnosis of the diseases, again, is based on this positive detection first, and then the symptoms that are showing on the particular grass being submitted. So at different times of the year, you can have lawns diagnosed with mosaic that test positive for sugarcane mosaic virus and that have a mild mosaic symptom, and that later develop lethal viral necrosis, again, that will test positive for sugarcane mosaic virus, but that have a different symptom. As far as what we do about the problem once it occurs in communities, one of the first extension messages that we had is don't regrass with Floratam. Floratam reinstalled into these lawns suffers, and that's one of the reasons it was brought to our attention was after 2 years of replacing lawns and giving good horticultural and chemical inputs to the lawns, they still failed, indicating that we had a disease that was not fungal and that was, of course, outside the regular realm of what we know turfgrass to need in Florida to do well. CitraBlue and Palmetto are two that can be recommended that don't die from the virus. They can be used to replace Floratam lawns and have done pretty well. It is important to purchase the sod that we're going to use from a reputable producer or supplier of sod that knows what genetics are present in the sod product being purchased. And this comes from some problems that have arisen with sod being purchased that was named and called and labeled as one thing and turned out to be Floratam later on. And so these grasses look similar. They can be confused even by professionals. And there have been mix-ups that have occurred, and where Floratam has been replaced back into a Floratam lawn, it has died. And so that's been the main indicator for us and clue that we've had a problem where a lawn failed again. It was found to be Floratam. Where CitraBlue or Palmetto are used, they have not. So if you're using a third-party wholesaler for sourcing your sod, buyer beware. Just know that it's better to purchase from a licensed producer. A farm member of the Turfgrass Producers Florida would be my recommendation, and then look for an installer that's vertically integrated that knows what sod farm their sod product is coming from before they install it. And when that has occurred, we haven't seen problems with lawns failing. Certified versus licensed. So we have a lot of, because of this problem with certain sod products being mislabeled or misidentified, I have questions about, can I buy certified sod or licensed sod? CitraBlue is a new release from UF. It's the only grass in Florida that has gone through this certification process to be appropriately called certified through the Southern Seed Certification Association. It helps in knowing that the sod growers received pure product to start their farms with, but it does not guarantee that what grows in those farms is pure. CitraBlue is patent protected. It's a new variety, and so we've found good, consistent product to have the genetics CitraBlue in it when it's labeled as that and certified and from a licensed producer. So we can recommend that. Palmetto is another older variety that also has been good and consistent as far as folks getting it from a licensed producer. It's not certified, but it can be produced from, sourced from a licensed producer, and we have seen good, consistent results as far as folks getting Palmetto when they purchase Palmetto from a Palmetto licensed producer. Again, there is no guarantee in Florida as far as sod product purity or the genetics of the sod product that you're purchasing. And so it can be difficult. The Florida Turf Producers Group has been excellent at working with UF and trying to come up with ways to address this. As far as these two grasses that are options, and there are lots of others, some new ones that I haven't evaluated, There are some older ones that that we've seen can work when they're sourced from somewhere that knows what they've got and knows that it's not Floratam. Here are two examples that I wanted to walk through just to illustrate the point that there's no silver bullet cure. There's no perfect grass. This is a UF grass, but it's new. There's less data, less time in the field. Most of the grasses installed don't end up being, powerhouse varieties that last for 40, 50 years like Floratam. Floratam has been very good because of many positive traits. CitraBlue is brand new. It has better fungal disease resistance than Floratam and then Palmetto and some of the others. Has good shade tolerance. When grown in full sun, it has a spongy growth habit and develops thatch. That can be a downside to it. And of course, like all of our St. Augustine's currently on the market, chinch bugs and sod webworms can be problematic. So it does require insecticide inputs, sometimes fungicide inputs, but generally less fungal input than Palmetto and some of the other varieties. Palmetto is an established variety. It's been around for a long time. There's a lot of field proofing of this grass. It has fungal disease susceptibility, so it requires fungicides to manage it. That can be done. It's not a disease that can't be controlled, but it requires additional inputs. Palmetto also has good shade tolerance. It does develop chinch bug and sod webworm issues. This is a readily available grass. It's been consistent. The genetics have been consistent in the products that we've evaluated, and Dr. Kenworthy has evaluated at UF, as has CitraBlue. This is the new kid on the block that has some shining promise, but is largely still being evaluated. It's done well so far. This is one that we know its weakness as well. We can manage those, and also has been consistent in the sod products being produced and purchased. What about zoysia? What about Bahia grass, frog fruit, seashore paspalum, Bermuda grass, ryegrass? Sure, we have lots of lawn alternatives in the state of Florida to St. Augustine grass. Some of those are turf, others are other ground covers, and they're all worth looking at as a community, as a homeowner, and evaluating for your own individual use in your lawn. St. Augustine grass is hard to beat as far as its durability, its persistence, and its a level of input required to maintain a good quality lawn. Zoysia grass can make an excellent lawn. It generally requires additional inputs, more input than St. Augustine grass. On the other hand, Bahia grasses tend to require less input, but they have a not as dense canopy, not as thick of growth, and are not acceptable as far as the quality of lawn that they produce in some cases for some homeowners. So these can be evaluated on an individual basis and for communities and thought about. IFAS is here to help with that sort of thing. Your county agent, the Turfgrass team here at UF can help suss out what are some of these strengths and weaknesses of these alternatives. Seashore paspalum is generally not recommended for home lawn use. It's kind of a nightmare of maintenance when put in a home lawn area as far as fungal disease, insect problems, etc. Bermuda grass can be a good option. It's not used a lot in Florida. It's used more in Texas and other areas of the Southeast. Nematodes are our biggest issue with Bermuda grass. And again, we have few options that are affordable for home lawns to be able to deal with those. Ryegrass, I throw that in there because some folks that have experienced this problem with lethal viral necrosis have asked, is there anything I can do just to have a temporary lawn until I can figure out what grass I want to go with in the spring? And this can be a winter cover crop. It is a temporary lawn. It can make it look a little better for a small amount of time that some folks have used. It's not a long-term solution by any means, and it does require inputs as far as water, fertility to establish it. I get a lot of questions from communities about, okay, we have this virus, we have the disease, do we have to replace all the lawns at the same time? Do we have to go with one of these two grasses that you're recommending or that IFAS has evaluated? Do we have to, et cetera, et cetera? And no, these are all guidelines. They're information, educational information that we provide as IFAS, but ultimately it's up to each individual homeowner, their HOAs, their communities, as to what will work for them. And the strategies being used have varied widely by individual and HOA, and they've all had a potential for success and have involved some very different strategies. And those range from wall-to-wall replacement of grass, very expensive, very much required to put all your chips into one or more genetics. So as far as turfgrass selection, piecemeal has been, I think, what most communities have done, identifying lawns that look the worst, setting some sort of standard that has to be met, or if the lawn needs to be replaced, and then helping homeowners to be educated about the problem, not to regrass with Floratam because of the likelihood of failure. And it boils down to aesthetics. We want to have lawns, turf grass, a very important part of the Florida urban landscape. We want it to be healthy so that it uses water and fertility and other provides other services as best as it possibly can for the given genetics of that turf. So it is aesthetic. It is something that individuals have to decide where their cutoff level is for acceptability and how to deal with that based on their resources available and their level of tolerance for poor aesthetics in some cases. So far, I can say that no strategy for any community I've dealt with has halted the progression and stopped neighboring lawns of Floratam once this virus has been introduced. It has taken longer in some cases than others, but the trying to eradicate lawns or rip out lawns on either side has been tried in at least 3 or 4 different communities, and it has not stopped those other neighboring lawns from eventually becoming infected, from being affected by the virus, at least if not a little bit later, on the same time frame. So no remediation effort has allowed Floratam to be used. I've had questions about, can I remove the soil? Can I put up trenches? Can we, somehow sterilize the soil? No, we definitely don't want to do any of those things because there's no remediation to get rid of all of the biological potential for this virus to come back in that we want to try to employ. So where soil has been excavated, one particular case in the Keys, and new soil brought in, the virus came back and killed the Floratam anyway. So the bug that flies through the air and drops this virus in has a lot to do with that. Even when we do a good job of preventing that lawn-to-lawn spread by mower, it has eventually been the case that these lawns have become infected. What are some of the renovation steps real quickly to go through these? A lot of questions and concerns about glyphosate. It's an excellent non-selective herbicide. There are concerns about it. IFAS has some resources for addressing those. It does help reduce competition from weeds and gives a clean slate for the new sod to be installed. If we don't use a non-selective herbicide, we can run into real issues with sod, successful sod installation, and it can actually cost us a lot more as far as money and input of other herbicides that are selective after the fact. So whether it's glyphosate or another non-selective herbicide is important, something that the IFAS generally recommends. And so there are some non-selective alternatives there. This is a publication from IFAS that kind of goes through some of those and some of the selective herbicides post-install as well that we can use. Weeds are a big issue for us on a resod, and in this case is no exception when the virus is present. Its general steps: remove the old dead sod and the weeds, cut it off and move it off property. The objective there is not to eliminate the virus, but to follow our best management practices for preparing the soil bed. It increases the chances of our sod success. That includes leveling, doing an irrigation audit so that we know that irrigation system is giving the right amount of water where it needs to be consistently to give our turf the best chance to, one, not overuse resources, and two, have a successful installation, become a nice lawn for us again. So the objective is to get a new lawn and to do so with the most efficient use of our resources. Once we install the new grass, we spent a lot of money on it. We want to take care of it and give it the proper post-installation care, and that means managing those insect and fungal pests, managing the weeds with as minimal herbicides as possible, because herbicides can damage our new turf, particularly new sod. So again, using that non-selective herbicide before really helps. And then we want to follow our IFAS recommendations where we can for fertilizer applications, rate, and timing for your particular area of the state. Recognize the mowing height and frequencies that are required. CitraBlue is mown at a shorter height, as is Palmetto, than Floratam, so you don't need to be up in the 3.5 to 4 inch range. Know what the mowing height and frequency recommendations are for the grass that you choose, the ground cover you choose, and then try to follow those as best you can to reduce overall plant stress and likelihood for sod failure. As I mentioned, this lawn was resodded with Palmetto. This was the 3rd installation of sod in 3 years, and this homeowner was ecstatic that the grass didn't die. It required fungicide applications twice a year for large patch disease, for take all root rot, it still has mosaic disease. The virus is present. It is not killing the lawn and won't kill this palmetto lawn. This is a lawn across the street from that community or from that property that was resodded with Floratam, and the Floratam uniformly died very quickly. Again, where this virus was present and had previously killed the lawn. So we don't want to use Floratam in these areas. It's an excellent grass for us in the more northern parts of the state where Sugarcane Mosaic Virus and lethal viral necrosis are not occurring. Has a lot of benefits. It's not one we want to use where we know lethal viral necrosis is present and killing lawns. So it's a good idea to know what's causing the problem, educate our homeowners, and make appropriate steps to prevent wasted resources like those used on reapplying Floratam in a lawn that where we know or reasonably know that it's going to fail. As far as the landscape maintenance folks that I talk to, the best advice is to try to keep the virus out of your account, which is impossible if you're in Palm Beach County or if you're in these areas where the virus is spreading. You can try to limit the movement of equipment from positive areas once it does occur in your accounts. Educate your homeowner clients that what you're doing is the best possible preventative strategies. And those would include removing clippings from the account and leaving them there before you move into a new account or new area of a community, where you can't allow enough time for the clippings and the plant sap to dry. Use a labeled sanitizer on the tires, decks, and blades. And then within the community, once we see these diseases come in, it makes sense to mow infected areas last. This is not going to stop spread of this disease, but it can slow it a little bit by mowing the areas where the most virus is present last. It doesn't spread then to new areas as quickly, and then it's a tighter amount of virus. And education is really important. We've had a lot of folks reach out to their county faculty. Those county faculty in Palm Beach and Miami-Dade and Lee counties have been excellent in helping HOAs and homeowners educate their clientele and know what's coming and how to make informed decisions about what to do about it. As far as pest control operators, the biggest, I think, weapon in our arsenal here is education and is diagnostic confirmation. It's a painful thing to do to have to tell someone your lawn has a virus that can't be cured. Is likely going to cost you thousands of dollars to renovate it. But if we don't come up front with that information, get the virus test done, have the documentation to show, it tends to snowball and become more difficult and more problematic, because what we're likely to do is try to use fungicides, herbicides, insecticides on these ailing and failing lawns, and they're going to die from the virus anyway. So rumor control, there have been all kinds of different stories as to where this came from or how it spread or whose fault it was. County offices have my name and number. You can find my email and my phone number online as well. Reach out to your county office and your county faculty if you hear disturbing things or things you don't think are right, and we're happy to try to help address those and try to help to educate folks about the best science on this particular problem. We have not found this virus on any sod farm. Sod is a potential source for inoculum. It could be that we buy sod that already has the virus, but we haven't found that to be the case. We've tested sod products, we've tested out in sod fields. Growers are still producing Floratam sod happily, and it grows just fine. If they had the virus, that would not be the case. So there's some general recommendations that we're giving to sod producers. They've been cooperative in large part and have helped to support some of the research that's been done to know what's going on here with this very problematic disease. So here is my office number. Here's my email, my Twitter handle, all that good stuff. I'll turn it back over to Tom and see if we have any time for questions. And I very much appreciate your attention and your invitation today to talk about lethal viral necrosis, mosaic, and St. Augustinegrass in Florida. Thank you.
Bill, thank you so very much. You answered so many questions already and took a lot of the mystery out of, this troubling disease. If, here in North Florida, where, it's not as big an issue. It's not something we're concerning ourselves with a whole lot, but down in South Florida, that's a huge concern. And I know that, the industry is, battling it and, having to put up with situations where, their clients just aren't happy. And so thank you very much for covering that. Do have a few questions that have come through. I know you talked about the fact that that the virus can affect some ornamental grasses. Can it spread to liriope that you're aware of?
No, I don't know liriope to be a host. I don't know that it would be a reservoir for the disease. Typically, we're looking at true grasses, and we're looking at C4 grasses or warm season grasses that go through a 4-carbon photosynthesis. Those are going to be the most common hosts on that host list. There's a fountain grass that's grown in Florida occasionally. As far as the native grasses, I don't know that anyone's tested. There was some research done by Dr. Philippe Rott, one of my colleagues, former here at UF, looking at weedy grasses around sugarcane fields, and he was able to find that there are several weedy grasses, that can harbor the virus and where the virus hangs out and in the environment. As far as in the landscape, we know it can be in Bermuda grass, it can be in crab grasses of all flavors, it can be in our St. Augustine grass, our Bermuda grass, but not seashore paspalum or zoysia at this point.
Okay, awesome. So if you've identified that you have mosaic in your turf, and maybe some necrosis, what do you do during, if it's summertime, what do we do with that turf at that point in time? Is it advisable at that point to remove it and replace it before the real damage happens in the wintertime, or where do we go?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and it's one that when I get asked that, I need to ask a lot more details about the background of the situation, and ultimately where I go with it is to say it's up to you, it's up to the HOA as to what your level of tolerance for a poor-looking lawn is. I can tell you what is likely to occur, what the progression has been in your neighboring communities and other communities within your counties, and I can explain, what that lawn is likely to look like next year, the year after. I can explain what some of the potential options are, like regrassing or allowing it to go, and how that's likely to cause weed issues and require some additional inputs. But in the end, it's an aesthetic and it's a financial decision that has to be made by the community and by the individual. And so, if you have the necrosis already, what's likely to occur is within 3 years, you're probably going to want to replace that lawn with something other than Floratam. So you have up to 3 years, best case scenario, to plan for that, to select a grass, to use your community buying power to try to reduce the costs for the community, and to generate consensus. And we're here at IFAS to try to help provide the data, the science behind what those decisions have to be made. But they're difficult decisions that have to be ultimately made by the community according to their standards and their abilities.
I love that, the community buying power aspect of that. If you can get multiple folks together in the same community, obviously you might be able to get a little better deal. So I think that's really smart.
We've had literally millions of dollars spent on sod to be able to replace some of these lawns, and particularly Palm Beach County. I heard one rumor that a community organization in multiple communities bought a sod farm,
wow.
a large interest in a sod farm, rather than trying to buy sod just because they wanted to address it that way. So I don't know if that was true or not, but it was a rumor that I heard.
Wow. Well, I guess that's one way to deal with it. That way you can replace as much as you need to.
Millions of dollars have gone into replacing this.
Wow. Can it spread, on your shoes by walking from an infected area to a non-infected area?
Yeah, not very well. So pets, shoes are a possibility, and they're an unlikely possibility because you have to pick up that sap and grind it onto the shoe and then quickly walk to somewhere where there's a host that hasn't been infected and grind that tissue and that sap into the new plant. And so, most pet traffic is not going to be heavy enough or destructive enough to do that. Most foot traffic is also not going to be heavy enough or destructive enough. Kind of football field moving across multiple lawns, potentially move it. Yeah, I think that's a possibility, but the mowers do such a more efficient job, and the bug introduces it longer distances. So it's probably not something that we need to concern ourselves about. Not a likely way for the virus being introduced.
Super. One more question that I have for you. You hadn't mentioned Broward County, which is in between Palm Beach and Dade. Are you seeing this spreading in Broward County?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah,
if you're in South Florida, it's something to watch out for.
Yeah, from Vero Beach, there's only been a couple of reports, and then I think it's every county that borders the Atlantic, all the way down through, of course, the Keys, and now up and around through to Lee.
Okay. Well, Phil, thank you so very much. You've answered all of our questions. This was it's certainly an important topic and something that has a lot of mystery to it. So you've taken a lot of the mystery out of this. Thank you for taking the time. Just to remind everyone, you heard Claire mention this earlier, July 11th, we have our next webinar. That's 10 o'clock Eastern time on underutilized trees. So we look forward to seeing you there. Don't forget to fill out your survey that pops up. We really appreciate that. That helps us plan for next year. Phil, again, thank you very much. Hope you have a great week and try and stay cool.
Thanks, Tom. You too.
All right. Take care.